Hey guys, Brad here from Scooter Street. I'm really excited because today is inner rotor day for my 𝐂𝐤 𝐬𝐲. Now in the previous video we unboxed the kit. Now to tell you the truth, I have actually gone home and installed the kit myself first. Now the reasoning for this, I've installed Malossi inner rotors before, but I've not installed one of the brand new kits, and I've not installed one on an air-cooled 𝐂𝐤 𝐬𝐲 before. Now the engines are pretty much the same, but there are just a couple little differences. Now I'm glad that I did this because in doing this, I discovered that Malossi have made a massive mistake in the instructions. And if you follow the Malossi instructions, you cannot install the kit. It's impossible to install the kit the way that Malossi have told you to. Now I've worked out the issue, which we'll discuss in a little bit. But first, I'm gonna sort of put this mostly back to stock so I can show you the install, and then we'll just sort of work forwards from there. Because if you've not installed one of these kits before, they are actually pretty technical. So I'm going to put some timestamps in the description. So if you're following along at home, you can go back and rewatch a couple of bits if you need to, because this does get into two-stroke timing of the engine, a couple of little bits and pieces that are a little bit more technical than I'm going to explain in the introduction, because I want to show you on the bike. So I'm going to go ahead and put this mostly back to stock. I'll start stripping the bike down, and we can start going through the actual installation progress. Now, just before we get too far into working on the bike, I just want to quickly mention from the outset, if you're going to be installing one of these kits on your scooter, there's a couple of additional parts that you need to purchase to make the kit work and to help you install it. Now, the first up on this list is this part here. This is called a micrometer. This is used to measure top dead center of the piston. And the reason we need to measure this, the factory flywheel is automatically set with the timing by the Woodruff key. Now the Malossi inner rotor ignition has adjustable timing. So we need to actually set the timing to a very specific number that is outlined in the instructions. So the way that we do this is by using the micrometer to measure top dead center, and then we work out where our timing needs to be from there. So I have installed one of these kits before without using a micrometer. It was a little bit dodgy and it was a real pain. You've just spent a fair bit of money on one of these kits, take the guesswork out of it, spend the extra 40 bucks, whatever it is for one of these, and just get the right tool for the job. That way you're not going to be second guessing, you know it's right. Now the second additional part that you'll need to buy if you don't already have it is a flywheel puller. Now we sell these on our website. This is a specific flywheel puller for the 𝐂𝐤 𝐬𝐲 factory flywheel. Now you can get some generic flywheel pullers from an automotive store, but this is just the right part for the job. It just makes it super easy, so do yourself a favor and get yourself a flywheel puller. Don't try and pull the flywheel off without a flywheel puller, you will not get it off. Now the other couple of small parts that you need to purchase to make the kit work, first of all, you need to purchase yourself 2 on-off switches, just simple two-way switches. You'll get this from an electronic store. Most automotive stores will also sell it. Now on my bike, I've personally chosen to go for a couple of marine grade switches. They're just waterproof. I don't have to worry about them corroding or degrading over time because one of the switches actually acts as the ignition on-off switch. So if it corrodes and stuffs up, you're going to end up stuck somewhere. I didn't want to worry about that. So probably my recommendation would be go some marine grade switches as well, so they're waterproof. Now the other thing you'll also need to purchase, probably from the same shop that you get the switches, you need to get yourself a couple of meters of just relatively light gauge wiring. You can usually get these in a spool pretty inexpensively. If you tell the person at the store that you're just looking for some wire for some 12-volt stuff, they'll give you the right stuff, but it doesn't need to be anything crazy heavy gauge. It's going to be handling 5 or 10 amps maximum, be probably way less than that. So you will need to get yourself some wiring. So go ahead and grab some of that too. You will also need either a soldering iron or access to someone who has one and knows how to use one, because you will need to do some soldering to get this kit to work. And the Malossi instructions only tell you to buy 1 switch. I've told you to go and get 2. Now the reasoning for this, we'll start off with the first switch. Now the reason Malossi tell you to buy a switch is because the inner rotor ignition cuts out your factory electronics, so your key ignition will no longer operate the on and off function of the engine. Turn your key off, the engine will keep running. So the Malossi switch and the instructions that they tell you to buy is actually the on-off switch for the engine. So it actually gives you a kill switch so you can turn your engine off, which is pretty important. Now the second switch that I've told you to buy is also because the factory electronics are cut out. Now to explain, the factory stator has a few different coils, one to provide spark to the engine, one to charge your battery, and another one to power your lighting. Now, because we've gotten rid of the factory stator, we no longer have charge for our battery. Well, that's easy to work out. We'll just regularly charge the battery with a charger at home. But how do we get power to our lighting? Well, this is where the second switch comes in. I've worked out a really easy little hack for this, which I'll show you in the install when we get to it. Okay, we can get to the actual install of the inner. And the reason I've stripped the back panels is because we need to install the switches on the inside of the seat bucket, but we'll get to that a little bit later. Also just makes the access to this a little bit easier. Now, as I mentioned, I had actually already installed the inner on my bike, but I've just sort of dummy installed the factory one back on, just so I can show you guys the full install process. The reason these wires are hanging out all cut like that is because this bike actually had the notorious Piaggio stator plug failure previously, which was really annoying. So I actually just hardwired them all. Because I hardwired them, when I installed the inner, I just cut them. But normally, if this is on your bike, you'll have a plug here, and you'll just undo the plug. Now, I would very much recommend an impact driver like this when you're doing these screws, particularly, which we'll get to in a second, the screws for the actual stator. There's 3 of them, steel screws and an aluminium casing. Over time they corrode and they get stuck. And if you just use a screwdriver, because it's not actually impacting it like an impact driver will, it's very easy to spin the actual cross in the end of the Phillips fitting. It's going to make it really hard to get the stator out, which is really frustrating. Now, the thread for this is very fine. So when you put it in, make sure it's in correctly. You're going to put it in as far as it will go. So we spread that strain across as much of the thread as we can. Okay, that's in nice and properly. There we go. Makes it look very easy, doesn't it? Okay, so there's our 3 stator screws, which I mentioned. So I always try and take these off with an impact driver. We have our 2 down here for the pulsar. These would normally be connected by the plug, but as I mentioned, I've cut my plug off. So they're obviously separate components. Okay, the first thing we need to do is install our backing plate. That goes onto the 3 stator screws there. Now, I will mention, normally I would use Loctite when I install these screws. We have, however, run out of it at the moment. You don't want to over tighten these, just nice and firm as per usual. Especially with these hex screws, the last thing you want to do is strip the hex, and they're a nightmare to get out. As the saying goes, every job is 1 stripped bolt away from a 3-day nightmare. Next up is our actual inner rotor. So this is the flywheel component of the inner rotor. So like the factory flywheel, it does still have a slot for the Woodruff key. So just, as long as you're confident that it's definitely in the right spot, go ahead and put our nut on. Okay, we're ready to install the actual stator component. That's this part here. So there's 2 parts. There's a backing plate, this part here, and there's the actual stator. Now, it pretty clearly tells you in the instructions which screws to use, so I've just gone ahead and used those 4. Now, really important, this will come into, make sense later when we actually get into the timing, but on this screw here, do not install the washer. And likewise, when we slot this in, when you put one of there's 3 mounting screws to actually secure the stator and the stator backing plate to the mounting plate. When you install the top screw, do not put a washer on that one either. Again, it will make sense when we actually get to the timing aspect of it. Now, do not tighten these. Just get them to the point that they're sort of as tight as they can be whilst still allowing this plate to rotate. because that's actually how we set our timing. That's the timing adjustment. So I'm going to set the screws basically tight and then half a turn back. Okay, there we go. Have our full rotation there. All right, so now that we have the inner rotor unit actually installed, it's time to come around to the wiring. Now, it looks like a big complicated mess, but I promise it's actually pretty simple. So probably the best place to start for this is with the CDI, which I've mounted just up under the seat by drilling a little hole here. Now, the reason I've mounted it under the seat is just to try and declutter the engine area, and also just to keep it nice and safe and keep these delicate little dials here safe as well. So if we follow this wire out here, see this here, okay? So we have the first one here, the big thicker black one, comes down to this plug, which I've cable tied nice and neatly out of the way. Now that one there is actually for the stator wire. So that comes directly off the stator into this plug. I've run it through this hole just to keep everything up out of the way and tidy. Okay, so we have two other wires, or three other wires coming out of it. We'll go one at a time. So this here is the coil that comes in the kit. This little mount here, it actually sits quite nicely onto the factory CDI coil unit mount, because the factory one is an all-in-one unit. This kit separates the CDI and the coil, but the coil just neatly mounts onto the factory mounting point there. So this yellow wire here comes around down into the coil, and the black one comes out of the coil over to the earth, which I've located just here. Lo and behold, this black wire here coming out of the CDI also goes to the earth. So we have those two earths there, one for the CDI and one for the coil. Now on the coil, those two different plugs are actually different thickness on the tabs, so you literally can't stuff it up. They can only go in one way. So now we're left with the last wire, which is this yellow one. Now this yellow one is the kill switch wire. So this is the wire we need to wire up to our kill switch to turn the engine on and off. So if we follow the wire up, you'll see it comes up to my waterproof switch under the seat just here. So essentially the way that this works, when there is no earth attached to this yellow wire, the engine will run. As soon as you earth this wire out to the chassis of the bike, the engine will stop. So essentially what it's doing is coming up to the switch, then the switch comes down to this little earth that I've bolted onto here. So basically all it's doing is when the engine's running, when the switch is in the off position, interestingly enough, because it's breaking the connection, when it's off, the engine will run. As soon as I flick that switch into the on position, it allows this yellow wire here to connect to this earth, which earths out the yellow wire and turns the engine off. Pretty simple. Basically, you just need to wire your switch in such a manner that you know which position is on for the engine and which position is off for the engine, because it's the opposite to the switch. There's an on-off switch. The off position of the switch will allow the engine to run, and the on position of the switch will connect to the earth and turn the engine off. Now, one thing I'll mention, when you're first installing this, if you want to do, like a trial start like I did, to make sure everything's working before you wire up this switch, this here, if you touch that wire while the engine's running, it will give you a real zap. So don't do that, it doesn't feel too good. So I'll get to our second switch before we sort the timing out. This is the lighting switch, this one here. So you'll see this is just an on-off switch as well. So you'll see it split. So one side is coming off up into the battery, right? So we get power from our battery to power our lighting. So if we follow the other side of the switch back down, right? Follow this red wire all the way around to the other side of the bike. We follow that red wire down here and we get to this here. Now it's kind of hard to see because this is normally on here where the stator plug for the bike side of the stator would be sitting. But basically what I've done is I've wired this red wire into the gray wire from the stator plug. Now, as I mentioned earlier, the factory stator has a bunch of different coils. One of them is for the lighting. The lighting coil wire is gray. So by wiring this wire into the gray lighting coil wire, what we've essentially done is wired power directly from the battery through a switch and then down into where the lighting power would normally be coming from the stator. We've just allowed ourselves to flick this switch, giving our lights power. I've got my factory stator here. So you see this coil here that this gray wire is attached to, that is the lighting coil. So we follow the gray wire around, up around to here, and you'll see that is where the gray wire was previously attached to the plug and where I've hardwired it. So all I've done is just connected this red wire up to the gray wire, and now we have power for our lights. I hope that wasn't too much information too quickly. just to summarize, essentially what we've done is we've installed so far the actual inner rotor stator component with the flywheel. We've installed the CDI and the coil, and we've basically just plugged them all together. Now, Malossi have been pretty intentional and clever here to make all of the different plugs and pins different sizes and shapes, so you can't really stuff it up. And if you get a little bit confused or you get a bit lost, there is actually a really good wiring diagram in the instructions that shows you where everything connects into everything else. Really the only plug that doesn't connect directly into something else are those two earth eyelets and the kill switch wire. Now with those two switches, when we're running the bike, we want the kill switch in the off position, but we want the lighting switch in the on position because we want the lighting to work, but we want the kill switch to be switched off so it breaks that connection and allows the engine to run. So basically, you just need to install the switches the opposite way from each other, just to make it simple. Now on my bike, I have it so when both the switches are up, the lighting runs and the engine runs, and when both the switches are down, the lighting turns off and the engine turns off. The next big ticket item is to set the timing. Now, this is sort of the most technical part of the install. It's not particularly difficult, but it's technical and it's very easy to get wrong. And unfortunately, it's the one part that the Malossi instructions are wrong on as well. Now, when I installed this inner rotor, I had a pretty good idea of what I was doing. So I worked out Malossi's mistake pretty quickly, but if you weren't experienced with doing this stuff and you just followed the instructions, it would be impossible to set this ignition correctly just by following the instructions. So essentially what Malossi have done, the first half of this instructional booklet is in Italian and the second half is in English. Now, when you read the English instructions, what it tells you to do is to set the piston to top dead center with your micrometer, and then it tells you to rotate the engine clockwise a certain number of mils to set the static keying advance. Now, the static keying advance, with your timing, advanced timing essentially makes the spark earlier, and retarded timing makes it spark later. So to make more power, this is a very simplistic version, to make more power, you want to advance the timing a little bit. So what Malossi mean by static keying advance is by the adjustment on the inner rotor here, right? When we rotate the inner rotor anti-clockwise, we're advancing the timing, and when we rotate the inner rotor clockwise, we're retarding the timing. So the static keying advance that Malossi want you to do in this book, in the back of the book, actually has a really good chart with a bunch of different cylinder kit part numbers, Malossi cylinder kit part numbers, and that tells you, right, and I know my kit is the very first one on the kit, right? It tells you, is it the very first one? Sorry, this is my one here. So mine's the 398 kit, right? So it tells you to advance the timing, right? Static keying advance, 1.55 mil. So essentially what we want to do is we want to get our micrometer into the spark plug hole, want to find top dead center, and then we need to rotate the engine anti-clockwise, so backwards 1.55 mil, so the piston comes down 1.55 mil, and that's where we set our static keying advance. Static meaning the timing is set at that level of advanced all the time, and then if you want to adjust it more, you can do so with the CDI, but we've set that as the standard all the time advanced timing. Now, what Malossi have stuffed up is when they've translated it from Italian to English, they've mistranslated the word anti-clockwise to the word clockwise in English. So instead of telling you to set a static keying advance, they're actually telling you to set a static keying timing, which obviously is going to completely stuff it up. And the other thing that clued me into it pretty quickly is when you try and do that, there's actually not enough adjustment in this system to be able to set it to that. And on top of that, when you rotate this clockwise, I know that that's the timing, not advancing it. So I knew something was up pretty quickly. So suspecting that was the case, I used Google Translate on the Italian version of the instructions in the front of the book and discovered pretty quickly that's what they had done. So the Italian instructions tell you to set the piston top dead center and then rotate the engine anti-clockwise 1.55 mil and then set the static keying advance to that point. But the English instructions tell you to set the engine at top dead center and then rotate the engine clockwise 1.55 mil, which would the timing. So Don't follow the English instructions on this particular part of the install because they're wrong. What you want to do is set the piston to top dead center using your micrometer, which I'll show you in a minute. And then you need to turn the engine anti-clockwise 1.55 mil, and that will set your static keying advance. Now, once you've done that, what you want to do, set it back 1.55 mil. Wherever this B mark is on the flywheel, then you want to match the B mark when the engine is in that position. Okay, I'll show you how to do it close up in a second. Okay, so I've got our micrometer here. So first up, it's going to pop this out of the way. Spark plug cap off. Oh, geez, it's tight, that Malossi one. Spark plug out. I know that's pretty close to top dead center, so I'm going to turn it back a little bit. Okay. Now you can get fancy micrometers. This one's just like the most basic one that you can possibly get. So I've just loosened this pin, right? This here, I think it's M14 by 1.25, something like that. It's exactly the same size as the spark plug thread, which is great because it means that it literally just screws into the spark plug thread. Now I'm going to just screw this out a little bit. That should be enough. You see it's got these marks on it, right? Then, you know, 0.1 of a mil, 0.2, 0.3, 0.4, etc. So I'm going to screw this into the spark plug hole. Okay, now I've screwed it until it stops. Now those little marks, unfortunately none of them are in a good position to see here, so I've actually put a little baby pen mark just here, just to give me some reference. All right, I'm gonna go slow here so it's hard to stuff up. So we've got our 0 on our little pen mark here, right? So we've got a good reference. Now this locking screw, I'm just gonna do it up hand tight. That way the piston can still push it around, but it's not gonna slip in and out on its own. Right, so hand tight, our 0 marker. Now I'm gonna rotate the engine clockwise. You'll see that pin coming out, right? And when it comes out no further, going back and forth, you know that's top dead center, right? So we found our top dead center. So now I'm going to use my Allen key and I'm going to lock that locking screw off proper. I can't move. All right. We've got our top dead center, back our engine over it. Yep, definitely not touching. Well, it's just touching it, right? That's top dead center. So now I'm going to rotate the engine anti-clockwise, right? Back away from top dead center, backwards away from top dead center. Now our marks here, we've got 0. So I'm going to go 1 full rotation back around to 0 to make it 1 mil. Because remember our static keying advance is 1.55 mil. So all around to 0, that's 1 mil. And then 0.1, 2, 3, 4, 5.5. So we've turned our engine backwards. And I've essentially wound this pin down into the engine 1.55 mil. So when we rotate the engine back up to it clockwise, there we go, so that's just stopped. Piston stopped when it's hitting it, right? That means that now our piston is 1.55 mil backwards from top dead center. So we've advanced the timing. So now we've found our timing, we need to set the timing, right? So again, that's stopping right there, right? Now you'll notice we need to, there's a B marker here, we need to line these 2 B markers up. Now, I mentioned earlier about not putting the washers in these, right? Now, in that booklet, 1.55 mil is the smallest keying advance, right? So this particular cylinder kit is the MHR Racing cylinder. This is like the lowest performance single ring cylinder kit that Malossi make for this engine. So if you were to go for like a higher end cylinder kit, the static keying advance in those higher cylinder kits is 4 mil, right? So we're back a lot further. This one here is only 1.55. So we pretty much have to max out our adjustment here to meet that B marker. So we go to the 1.55 mil, that's where it's sitting, right? And our B mark pretty much lines up at the maximum setting, which, you know, I don't really like maxing anything out, but it stands to reason this is the lowest performing kit, right? So this is right on the very edge of what this inner rotor kit is designed for. So it stands to reason that we're going to be right on the edge of the adjustment. They wouldn't make it adjustable past what it needs to be. So there we go. So our 2 B marks are pretty much lined up. And the reason I took the washers out of here is they weren't allowing me to get far enough to line that mark up. So by taking them away, those two bolts are able to pretty much touch each other, and we get basically exactly to our B marking. So what we're going to do now, we're going to lock off those 3 bolts to set our timing. Now again, I would usually put a little bit of Loctite on these, but we've run out of Loctite in the shop, which is annoying. So you don't want to over tighten these, because if you need to take these off, you don't want it to be a nightmare, especially with these hex screws. They're so easy to strip. Now that that's done, our timing's set, I'm going to take the micrometer out, because the last thing you want to do is try and start the engine with the micrometer in, because it's going to have a high likelihood of smashing a hole in your piston. So let's just take this thing out now. So there's absolutely zero possibility that that can happen. Next up, I've got to put our flywheel on, so I'll pull these flywheel bolts back out. Now, as I mentioned in the unboxing video, this flywheel is super duper lightweight. Now, on the liquid-cooled kit, the flywheel is optional, so you can, get the maximum responsiveness out of the in-rotor ignition. Now, unfortunately, on the air-cooled kit, we obviously still need a fan to cool the engine. So you unfortunately have to run the flywheel, because you'll see our 3 fan mounting bolts here. You obviously have to run those. So be really careful with these screws, because these ones love to strip. They're such a pain. Usually use an impact for this as well. There's less chance of it torque stripping. Okay, now with the fan, I know these bolts look evenly spaced, but they're actually not. They're actually slightly different. So you just need to rotate it until you find the correct position, which I've just fluked. First go, and then we just use our factory fan bolts that just go straight into those holes. Now the threads for these are super duper shallow, so when I get home and I have Loctite at home, I'm going to pull this back apart and re-Loctite all of this. Now next in the instructions, Malossi actually tell you to shave down the fins of the fan, because the Malossi in-rotor actually spaces the fan out a little bit further than the factory position, and the fins hit the inside of the fan cover. Now, I had a look at this and I sort of thought, to be honest, I thought it was a better idea to remove this little, it's like an air suppressor essentially. It's like some foam with a little plastic cage holding it in. I thought it made more sense to me to remove this just by breaking these plastic welds here and popping it out, leaving me with this. I thought it was a better idea to do this, which maintains the size of the fan fins, but allows them to not hit the inside of that shroud. Now that's against the instructions. This is something that I've gone out and done myself. Now I've done a test with our factory shop zip, just sort of feeling underneath it at idle and revving it up, how much air is actually coming through underneath the cylinder where the air exit is for the air cooling. It seems to be exactly the same between our shop zip, which has just the factory stator, and mine. So it doesn't seem that taking this out has reduced any of the air cooling at all. But again, I have decided to do this myself. You have to make a decision based on what you want to do, based on what you think is best. If you want to shave down your fan following the instructions, I'd go ahead and do that, because that is the instructions. Now, keep in mind, these are the same instructions from the people who told you to set your timing wrong. So, make of that what you will. This is what I've chosen to do, and you need to make a decision, based on what you think is best. I've also shaved a little cutout here, so that my wire coming out of the stator here, when I clip the shroud back in, it can just pop out of the top here, because I was a little bit concerned with running it around all the way down through the factory exit for the factory wiring, that it would have just a lot more likelihood of coming into contact with some of these rotating parts here and severing the connection, because that would be really frustrating. So I've chosen to do it like that way. The wire comes straight up and out, away from any potential damage, because that was what I was quite concerned about. Go ahead and chuck everything else back together. Malossi give you these little brass bushes to put inside the coil mounts. Just be careful because when you take it off, they have a tendency to pop off and do that. All right, first start time. Now, if you're doing this, I would highly recommend going back through and just double checking all your plugs, making sure everything is right, and then fire away. Definitely runs. Now I suspect I'll get a little bit more performance out of this by making the rollers a bit heavier. I'd had them way too light before to try and compensate for how heavy the factory flywheel was and how much the bike was struggling to get going. With this still installed, I think I can make them heavier now that I've got the inner rotor installed, but maybe just get a bit of a baseline first. Well, she's not slow. Okay, so the inner rotor's obviously made a pretty big difference. It is so snappy and aggressive and angry, just really angry little zip, which is exactly what I wanted and what I was expecting. So I'm pretty stoked with that. It doesn't always come through in the video, but you know, it's really fun to ride. Even like 30, 40 Ks an hour, you twist the throttle and it just wants to bring the front up straight away. And that's even with a pretty big riser block in the rear suspension, you know, sort of pointing the nose down to try and stop it from lifting, and it still wants to lift. So that's pretty awesome. One thing I didn't really go into is the mapping modes on the CDI, which I'd like to have a bit of an experiment with. So I think there was like 5 or 6 mapping modes. At the moment it's on 0, so it's what they call just the static keying advance. So it's just a flat advanced timing set to that. I think it's like 16 to 17 degrees, which is what we've set with the timing, what they recommend. Now when you go to map 2 and map 3 are both 70cc timing modes. Actually, I think maybe even map 4 is the same too. And they're just basically, the CDI will change the amount of advanced timing depending on the RPM. In the back of the instructions is actually a really good little graph that shows you what the advanced timing is at different RPMs in the different mapping modes. So, you know, I think it's like, it's on 0 now, and I think there was 2 or 3 70cc cylinder kit different mapping modes. And then there was a couple for the larger cylinder kits like the 94. Now, looking at the graph, some of the 70cc advanced timing modes, the more race-oriented ones, the advanced timing's like 30 degrees plus at, you know, higher RPMs, which is, you know, it's all well and good to add a lot of advanced timing and get more power, sure, but the more you advance the timing and the more power you make, the more heat you add, and it can get to a point that it starts to overcome the ability of particularly an air-cooled cylinder, you know, its ability to withstand that much heat. You know, so I probably have a bit of an experiment with them just out of curiosity, but to be honest, I'll probably just leave it on the 0 to actually ride around, because particularly while it's air-cooled, you know, in the future I'll liquid cool it for sure, but at the moment while it's air-cooled, I don't want to seize it halfway, you know, half an hour away from home, seize the engine, trying to get an extra 2% power. You know, it's a bit of a pain. So I'm just going to leave it on that static advance. 16 to 17 degrees advanced timing is already pretty advanced. So it's like, how advanced do I need to be? Now, I just want to reiterate, I alluded to it a couple of times throughout the video, but the MHR inner rotor does not provide any power other than just to spark the engine. So that's obviously why we hooked up power for our lighting, but the other big one is the battery. It will not charge your battery like the factory stator. Now, this is a pretty easy issue to get around. Unfortunately, we can't get around it the same way we did with lighting because the battery can't power itself like it does the lighting. So all it means is you just need to buy yourself, if you install one of these, just a trickle charger. You don't need a big powerful charger or anything like that. just a trickle charger is fine. You can get ones that actually hook up with eyelets. You bolt them to the battery and you can just have a little plug hanging around underneath the seat. When you park your bike at home, you just plug it in. Now on this bike in particular, I've put an LED globe in the headlight just to reduce the power consumption. And I'll probably end up doing the same with the taillight as well. Now on previous bikes that I've had, I did this. I had an SR50 with an inner rotor and I converted everything to LED. I had to charge that battery like maybe once every 6 or 7 rides, and I'd go out for big, 45-minute to an hour rides. So the power draw on it is actually very, very low, especially if you're running LED globes, because obviously it's not having to power the engine, it's just powering lighting, that's all it's doing. So it's doing very, very little work now. So it's not a big deal. It sort of puts a lot of people off having to charge the battery, but it's really not a big deal. You just plug it in every few rides. I think on my previous bike, I even put a little voltage gauge on the dash, or probably even on this, maybe even put a voltage gauge under the seat, because I'm going to be under there using the switches to turn it on and off anyway. So I can just have a quick glance and, oh yeah, probably time to plug it in, or oh no, it's all good, don't need to plug it in, just for a bit of peace of mind. The thing is though, say your battery does go flat, you're just not going to have a headlight. It's not a huge deal. The bike will still run, it will still ride, and everything other than the lighting will work. So it's not ideal, but it's not a disaster if you happen to be out on a ride and the battery goes flat. Anyway, thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed that one and got some good information out of it. Inner rotors can be a little bit scary, but you just break it down into small steps. It's really not that big of a deal, and man, they make such a big difference. So hopefully, if that's you, if you were a bit too scared to do it before, hopefully I've given you enough confidence to have a go and put an inner rotor on your scooter. Anyway, thanks again for watching. If you like this video, please hit the like button. If you have any questions, let us know in the comments. We endeavor to answer every single one. And if you haven't already, make sure you subscribe to our channel, because we have a lot more videos like this coming out shortly. Anyway, we'll see you next time.